When I wore it, I think a lot of people's immediate interpretation went to the amount of money that's flowing into our industry right now, which is just like at its absolute peak. And the vibes of those groups, like a lot of private equity type stuff, it doesn't coincide with the hospitality values that a lot of these small businesses have been working on. So everyone was immediately drawn to, oh, they're buying us, right? And
Yes.
and then other people would come in and say, well, like, I thought it was about slavery. I was like, whoa, hadn't even, like, you took it quite literally.
Yeah.
So I just found it fascinating how much it says about the person and their particular story, their interpretation.
Totally. Yes. I know that's really interesting, right? When someone gives you a response. Well, I loved your question like way before even you picked up the piece or I brought the piece to you or whatever, of like, what are some instructions for wearing
Yeah.
something like
What
this?
am I about to get myself into?
It's fantastic. It's a great question. No one's ever asked me, but I think they're always thinking it. And I'm like, hee hee, have fun. Best of luck. And you asked me, what are some instructions for, wearing this? And I replied and said, a lot of the times I like to turn it back onto the person, be like, well, what do you think it means? So, and then when people give you that response, it is very much about them. And you're like, oh, wow, this is interesting that it says everything about the person, which is fascinating to, have them, have this like reveal or admittance. And then, then you can, bring your 2 cents or your opinions into that conversation. And then it's like this whole thing that happens, which is cool.
But it was like a little bit nervy putting it on for the first time. I was at a very fancy hotel in a very Republican part of the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was like, this is kind of like edgy.
It's super edgy, yeah.
And immediately I start getting looks. And I'm like, oh God, what's about to happen? But it was quite an experience for me. Of course, I got over that nerves real quick because I was like, this is it. This is part of the whole thing.
Yes.
And what I found especially cool was sharing that feedback with you and having you say that now I was an extension of the work.
Yes.
An extension of your feedback loop.
Yes.
So it's almost like it's like fractals.
Yes.
Out into the world. Have you processed what that could mean as more and more people buy these things?
It's pretty cool because it's like this subliminal messaging, right? That's also put onto us from advertising, marketing, the media. So I'm sort of doing a similar business model, but for good. It kind of consider it propaganda, anti-propaganda. But it's they are like these drops of very direct thoughts, that can kind of like zap people out of their day to day, and then people have these conversations with these people, and then then maybe that's like its own thing. But then if I have people having these pockets of conversation like all over, that's really cool, right? And what the macro effect of that would be, it's too early to say, but if it, gets people kind of thinking and spreading empathy and also courage, I think those are all great things that we need even more and more and more of, especially now. And I encourage people, anyone that buys a garment, because they're like relentless and they're unapologetic, and I want people not to be afraid when they wear them. I want them to be like, like feeling good, and that's really important to me.
That was one of the instructions you gave me. Like, you gotta have the energy for this.
Yes.
And it was so true, because if you go in kind of like timid or like in a corner, it's not going to work. But if you go and you're standing strong and centered and grounded, and someone comes up to you and you know that you're kind of about to influence them in a way. It's a very interesting feeling. I never experienced that wearing anything before. In this world in which everybody's on the social media platforms, but everybody's disconnected in so many ways.
Right.
And in a world in which you go into a nice hotel, but everyone's so divided or so just echo chambered off from one another. It's not common to have discussions with strangers anymore.
No.
So this is like really cracks open that whole thing for me.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, these are all like communication, right? And there's so much lack of communication in the world, and people sort of are living in like their own like kind of thought bubble, and they have their their own opinions that they may feel really righteous about or not, or so. But then this is an interesting bridge because you can have conversations with people who, maybe they don't politically align with you, but there is like some interesting common ground, right? And like a connecting factor, a glue. Or people just don't like it and they don't want to look at it, or they don't want to, they're just like, whatever.
Right. Well, if they're not curious, they're likely not going to come up to you anyway.
Yes. And then there's also an aspect of like wearing it and having kind of like a light energy, an open energy as well, because they can be sort of intimidating. And people that are, they're just like, oh, I don't know, they're just kind of a little bit more cautious, will kind of like steer away. But, I feel like you're like this way, and me as well when I'm wearing them, and I kind of turn around or I smile at people and they're like, oh, it's really cool, what's that about? And sometimes like that initial sort of body language like also opens up the dialogue for someone that was maybe a little nervous to sort of start it themselves.
Totally. You mentioned earlier that the thought came into your head, you were like, oh, that's it, I'm going to go pray on the jacket, and then sort of that was the spark that started it all. What's your advice to people who have an idea, who haven't actually done it or effectuated it, and it's just kind of like sitting there kind of tickling them?
Do the idea. Well, this is the thing. Ideas can become watered down over time. So it's like when you have an idea, I'm a really big believer in like executing it relatively quickly, like at least within 3 months, because sometimes ideas need to marinate, but other times they need to be executed and come to fruition within a shorter time, or they're just going to kind of like get lost. And then you're like, oh, so much time went by, and then you're like this and that. But also, on the other side of that is, it depends on the idea as well, I should say. But it takes courage. It also takes a good soundboard. Like if people have an idea and they trust someone and they respect someone, I would be like, get that person in the room and talk to them. Get a whiteboard, like work it out, and write it out, because there's so much like in our brain. And then like our brain tells us things, and we have this like kind of like left and right brain that's like, don't do this, do that. And it's like we have to sort of shut down that too, and then just put it out honestly, and then having another person that you respect and admire and who will listen to you and give you some thoughtful feedback, I think is really helpful. And that's helped me a lot. But you just gotta do it. You gotta do the thing. I brought the Pray coat to Paris during Fashion Week long time ago. And then a couple weeks later, someone sends me this like streetwear brand, and they have pray on the back of a raincoat. And I was like, that's interesting.
Oh my gosh.
And so I have a friend of mine who's an entertainment lawyer. She was kind. She sent like a cease and desist letter or whatever to them, and they stopped. But that was something that used to like really rev me up. Like people would send me stuff on Instagram. They're like, oh, like look at this, and I'm like, oh, whatever, like And I've gotten to a point now where I'm like, I got to put the work out there, right? I can't just like hide it, or I have to promote it, and it will inevitably have an effect on fashion or designers or whatever. And I don't even consider myself a fashion designer, because I'm not melding these things together. I'm just sourcing them and then printing on top of them. But that's always something that's like in the back of my mind, of just like totally getting ripped off and like not getting any credit. But I don't think anyone it would be a little difficult, I think, because there's just a lot of imperfections, and there's a lot of, things that I do that I don't think other people are doing. What else scares me? I'm like, public humiliation. That would be the worst. Whenever I'm saying something, I am very sure about it, right? Like if I'm printing something, I'm like, okay, like I'm not going to say something that I don't know a lot about. Like I always want to have the authority and brain space to speak on the thing that I'm saying, right? So I don't know if that's like an internal fear or like what that is, but that's something that I think about a lot.
How do you wield focus? Like, where is most of your focus done? How do you think about focus?
There's times where I'm really focused, and then times where I'm not. And the times that I'm not, I'm like, okay, just don't even try. Just do like weird things all day. That's fine. Like you want to do a little writing, you want to do this, but I notice that my focus is much better and stronger when I limit my time on social media. I limit any screen time, really. I'm exercising regularly, and I eat really clean. And like what I'm feeding myself, my consciousness as well as my body, that's like very aligned, right? And that in turn helps my focus and my grounding. But sometimes it's just not there, and that's okay too.
I think in general, across the interviews here, creative breakthroughs happen within that flow. And they get blocked when there's either too much worrying, or there's too much of a dry spell, or there's not an active flow of.
Yes.
What inspires you?
So many things. The media, advertising, different news stories. I'm really interested in, the manipulation of information, the definitions of words and of things, just like reality. I can just go outside and find inspiration. It's under our noses all the time, and I think there's so much to pull from this like ether of, reality, and there's all of these actors and performances like on TV and with these people, and and it's just very interesting to watch certain things unfold in like whatever like the dominating narrative is, and how the media spins things, and for this side or this side, and I'm really interested in why people do the things they do, and the human condition, and how people are affected by certain things in the media, or by this bombardment of information, or what this massive amounts of communication are doing for people, because it's like we have so many sources of communication, yet no one is really effectively communicating. Like, isn't that ironic? And also, is this like something that is like is desired and promoted because it keeps the population fragmented and disturbed and angry and negative, and how that fragmentation is then it's so easy to like rile us up, and it's so easy to control mass perception, and that's really interesting to me. So I like to kind of dig into all of these like spaces and kind of go into these areas with a flashlight, and talk about them, or attempt to articulate them in ways that people didn't think about before.
How does someone who wants to communicate more realness, perhaps a more authentic voice for themselves, or a clearer vision, or just a more engaging, sort of relatable kind of communication? What if people are stuck in either a corporate world where it's all kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
Not all of corporate America, of course, but there's all these ways of doing things and systems and processes where your authentic voice is really not championed at all. It just kind of atrophies over time.
Yes.
Or social media where you're just being bombarded with stuff.
Yes.
Do you have advice for people? How do they find their real, authentic communication voice?
I would say that to not compare yourself with anyone. I think we live in like a very comparison culture, right? Of like, oh, this person's doing this, I'm not doing that. Oh, this is, and so kind of like cutting that. I think it's good to have like people that are aspirational or people that influence you, but not having like a hero, and just sort of being kind of cutting out the noise and being very honest with yourself, and forming your own original thoughts and opinions, if that's even possible.
Right.
And how else for someone to do that? So yeah, the dropping the comparison aspect, and I suppose maybe opening your eyes to other opinions that you didn't consider before, or like stepping out of like your own echo chamber, or doing something totally the opposite of what you normally think you would do, and kind of breaking your own internal algorithm is like I think helpful. Of like, oh, I'm not gonna order from Seamless or Uber Eats. Like, let me like cook something. Like, let me do a recipe I haven't done before. Oh, I'm really interested in this. And I don't know, just food's a silly example, but perhaps doing activities that one normally wouldn't do, and seeing who you are in those activities, or putting yourself in certain events or certain social scenarios, and just like kind of watch yourself of like, okay, who am I here, and starting to really track yourself. I mean, and people could do that with their day-to-day with a journal. I had a mentor who was very keen on this. He's like, watch who you are throughout the day. Who is Katelyn when she's on the subway? Who is Katelyn when she's in class? Who is Katelyn when she's talking to someone? Who is Katelyn when she's behind a bar? Who is she when she's making art? And noticing these changes in one's mental process or mood or feelings, and how that could maybe illuminate something for someone, could potentially help.
Because what I'm hearing is it's like almost looking at yourself from a third party perspective.
Yes.
And saying like, okay, like this is what I do, this is what I think, and how could I maybe break that? How could I like add some new things into that and see how I respond to it? I may like the thing, I may not like the thing.
Yeah.
I may be terrified, or I may be surprised. And I think that experience of the new thing is what helps strengthen that voice.
Totally. And you're also being open to being uncomfortable, right? We're in a constantly like coddle culture of like, if we're uncomfortable, we kind of just like bring out our phone, or we do this or we do that. It's just like, go engage with people, go make eye contact, go shake hands, go have conversation that, maybe you don't know anything about a topic. Who cares? Like, everyone's an expert, everyone's a critic, everyone's this, everyone's that. It's just like, just drop it and, be uncomfortable for 5 seconds of your life. Maybe you'll learn something about yourself.
Do you ever find yourself with friends or family or just the general public who does not work in a creative space like you do? Do you find that creativity, innovation in a traditional business setting is underserved, or maybe not explored nearly as much as it needs to be?
Totally. I mean, I have a friend who I went to art school with, and now she's in real estate, and she was like, oh my God, I apply everything that I learned in our like critique and seminar classes to like my business meetings with like real estate people. And I was like, that's really cool, and I think people that also have this creative background and are now in these like business or corporate settings really shine, because people are like, oh, there's something different about you, and I don't know why, but you're adding something here. And it's like, yes, it's like and there's also, I think, the stigma that these types of environments and people within them are not creative. And I'm like, no, like everyone sort of has this ounce of creativity. I think some people I don't know. I don't want to say some people have more of it than others, but some people are just more, look at the world a little differently or articulate creativity in different ways. And that may be a painting for someone, or it may be how someone does their dishes, or, it could be anything. But I think that in these corporate settings, it would totally benefit from more kind of like creative or artistic kind of energy, for sure.
Join our creative business community at heregoesnothin.com.